walk through the line here and just give us your name and when you started attending.
My name is Jim Lowen. I started attending in 1963. I was 10 years old.
I'm Julie Zilke, and I think I started attending when I was about 7.
I'm Joyce Lowen, and I know that Bill and I came in 1971. I must have been 25, huh?
Shortly after the flood or 1971?
So, hey, let's start with you, Jim. You were here when we moved over, and so what did the Gal Church feel like? What are some of your memories?
Well, as was pointed out earlier in the comments, it felt like family. It was small, although it seemed big. Maybe it's because I was 10 years old and I looked up to people then, and physically. And it was small, and everyone knew everyone. It was a good feeling. Felt like home. We all took responsibilities for things. They took turns cleaning the church, and I remember doing that. Lots of good memories of people we knew.
Good. Julie, what about you? Memories, Gal Street.
I remember that we were at church a lot. If the doors were open, we were usually there. It was a great place to go because we could see our friends. I remember sitting in church and looking at a creepy aquarium-looking baptismal, which I was eventually baptized in. And also there were evening services at that time, so we got to go back again and do church in the evenings, which my brother and I did not always look forward to, except on the nights that we had deacons meeting. My parents were deacons, and then we got to play bombardment while they had their meeting, and Brent and his brother and sister were a part of that.
Joyce, you and Bill were an active part of this church for all these years, and certainly at Gal. Just talk about the spiritual dynamic of the Gal Street. What are some of the spiritual memories you have? Just talk about what was happening spiritually at the church.
Well, I know in my life, my children were just very young and babies, and as the years went by a little bit, I was very interested in the children's program, taught Sunday school, and something about raising kids, and then also I came to the first women's ministry. It was called Mary Martha Circle, and we did quilt sewing and had a Bible study, and I got into that and found that it needed changing because of parents who wanted to be biblically based. I don't know, blah, blah, blah.
Good. Yeah, if you choose, Joyce, just choose one or two ideas of what, you might even say programming, women's ministry or kids ministry, but what was happening in the church there. So that's great. Dr. Bill, a little bit of your memories regarding where our church was at in shifts or in their growth.
Well, some of the themes have always been expressed, which is the community family theme and the need and the emphasis on teaching Jesus and promoting Jesus and the growth of the church, with the resultant prospect that we were soon running out of space. So in the late 70s and 80s, we started exploring the option of moving, and the dynamic theme there was unity, exemplified by some of the older people that had moved into the area, emphasizing the fact that we were not there to be comfortable, but that evangelism and winning people to Jesus was a dominant theme.
Good. And tomorrow, it will feel much different just because there's obviously a lot of people out there. But like I said earlier, don't be afraid if you have a little card that has some prompts for you. But basically, what are your memories, just generically, and for you two, a little bit about the church dynamic. What was happening in the church, spiritually or in programming or ministries, okay? As soon as Dr. Bill's done, I say, hey, thank you, let's give them a, you know, and we'll all applaud. We put the mics where?
That's a good question. Lay them right down.
They could leave them on the chairs.
Yeah, leave them on the chairs.
For right now, you can leave them on the chairs you're sitting on, and we'll figure out.
Okay. So they're applauding, and we're going down, and I think there's a song now. So.
First of all, you were under 5 minutes. Just wanted you to know. Okay. So when Bill's done and you say thank you, let's all applaud, then the choir's coming back. Steve Blaisdell will step up here in front. Okay, Neil. Steve Blaisdell needs to have his wireless mic, and I don't remember what number he was, but
Okay.
his shouldn't go here.
Right.
So mine, number 1, and whatever Steve is, shouldn't go here. Okay. So Steve will step up, and they lead 2 hymns. At the end of that, the 21st Street runs.
Okay, so I'll read that.
And this is when we will come up.
Okay, ready for 21st Street?
Yes. I'll probably be, first service, I'll probably be right here.
Okay. Okay, so Great is Thy Faithfulness ends, the choir singing that. The choir exits after the song is over as the video comes up, and here's what it sounds like. In the mid-1980s, FirstMB attendance neared 500, and it became clear that the size of the property was putting a lid on the ministry of the church. In 1984, 2 steps were taken to facilitate expanded ministry. A new church, East Wichita Mennonite Brethren Fellowship, was planted in East Wichita, meeting first at WSU and then later on North Oliver, and planning was begun for a new facility. Studying the projected growth of the city alongside the reality of the church family's current home led the planning team to recommend the purchase of what was then an open field on 21st Street, in the middle of nowhere, northwest of Wichita. Groundbreaking for the new church building took place in 1986, and the facility was dedicated in July of 1987.
That's it? Okay, it ends with the facility dedication.
And the facility was dedicated in July of 1987.
So then lights come up, and I say, okay, so I am here with 3 people who can share with us a little bit about what was going on here at 21st Street when the church moved here. Can you just tell us your name and when FirstMB became your church?
In February of 1965, my bride of 10 days, Judy, and I moved to Wichita. And it was during 1965 that we began attending FirstMB.
My name is Brenda Henneberg, and I started attending here with my family in 1975 at the age of 1.
My name is Jason Clausen, and I'm pretty sure I just came along with my parents at birth in 1972.
So, Reg, you were a key leader during the process of the church moving from Gow Street to 21st Street. Can you tell us a little bit about what the vision was for that transition and for this location?
Well, we had a vision, first of all, of continuing the family concept and momentum that we had at Gow. And we laid out a facility at this new location that had some big dreams in it. It had provision for buildings, for future outreach ministries, maybe something like a Little Lambs preschool. We had room for buildings for denominational offices, and we had laid out some buildings for extended family care facilities. We agreed to move to this location with the explicit understanding that we would not do so simply to serve ourselves better and more comfortably, but to reach out to our community. The entire project was scaled to handle a certain number of people. We had no dreams of becoming a mega church. When growth got us to that maximum number, we hoped to solve the issue by sending groups out to start new churches. And we've probably arrived at that point.
So after the church moved here in '87, through the '90s and even early 2000s, there wasn't fast movement towards that vision of sending out other churches and reaching out assertively into our community. What are your thoughts on that?
The many adjustments of moving into a much larger campus were quite consuming, not to mention the huge debt we had taken on. We have never liked financial debt and have always retired it pretty quickly. But while we were making loan payments, obviously we had less available for programming in this new space. I think that forced us to restrain new program ideas and to more or less hire staff only to deal with the immediate needs. Eventually, God inspired us to add staff in anticipation of new opportunities, and I think that is what led us to where we are today.
One more question for you, Reg. What have you noticed about this church and God's movement in this church over the years?
When we started attending in 1965, the church was under the leadership of an interim pastor. And in the 50-plus years that I've been involved here, we've had numerous interim pastors. We've had numerous permanent pastors. And I think one of the main things that has inspired me originally to come here, originally to stay here, and to become an active member of the church has been the fact that I noticed there were always a concrete group of people who stuck with it when things got rough. And that's always been the case. And as we've changed leadership over the years, there was always that nucleus of families that stuck around and helped with the transition and helped with moving forward. And that was a great inspiration for me.
That's great. Brenda, so you come at this with a little bit of a different perspective, or I'm about to ask you about a part of your life that's a little bit different perspective. As a kid, you grew up at Gow, and then you were junior high age when the church moved here. What do you remember? Like, what did church feel like to you as a person who grew up here and now you're here as an adult with your own family?
Starting here at the age of 1, our family didn't have a lot of biological family in town. So the Gow Church was an extension of my family. My friends' parents were my parents, who were free to discipline us as well. And so we had that extended family. So even though as children we didn't have a lot of say in the transition out to West 21st Street, we knew that I've got it written down here, that we just knew that our hiding options while playing sardines were going to grow exponentially. So we were excited about the move. We were excited about the bigger building, not realizing that that family that I felt, sense of family, was going to continue to grow as the church grew. So into the 90s, as many of my peers and myself were going off to college, not very many of them returned, just a few fortunate ones chose to return back to this is our home base. I had to grow new peers, but the neat thing was, as the church was growing, people our age were joining the church. College classmates, people that someone knew, were starting their church family here, which then also meant for me the benefit of the Henneberg family joining the church, which later on would become very beneficial to me. So I'll not have this tomorrow, but I don't know. So later on as a young married couple, Ryan and I we grew our spiritual family, and that family then became more extended church family. And then in the future, again, benefiting our children, repeating that wonderful experience.
So as the church continued to grow in this location, a couple of things happened. With growth, this congregation found it worthwhile to change the way the decisions were made, and that led to two big shifts, one being the leadership structure here made a big shift, and the congregation decided together that it was time to pursue what had been a long-term building goal of adding a worship center like the one we're in right now. This worship center was a dream that began to have concrete flesh and bones around it in the middle of the 2000s, and the building process started in 2009. This facility opened, this room opened in March of 2010. Since that time, that kind of marked a shift in the church's self-image even. And now we are operating under a different kind of leadership structure, and we continue to see growth with that. So Jason, even though you were born into this thing, you now wear the hat of a grown-up. You've been serving the church as the moderator for the past number of years. What would you say you see that God is doing in our church now?
That's a good question, but before I spend too much time adulting, I do have to mention that the move from Gao to here was marked with a pretty singular disappointment for us boys, in that we could no longer get on the roof as easily here as we could there, so our adventures were mostly limited to a blank piece of land and playing sardines with the girls. This church has been my home for quite a long time, and through the transition of growing up and going away to college and coming back and finding myself and trying to become adult, and then spending some time now in some leadership, I'll say that it seems like we are more intentional these days. And that could be an outflow of the fact that it seems like maybe life is more intentional for us all. But our intentionality around prayer seems to be a thing. And then just as we start in now on some of the future things that we're talking about with the My Path, we're intentional about our purpose. And it seems like we have a pretty steady spirit of fulfilling one of our intentional visions of reaching out from here and moving further away. And then I'll have my verse somewhere in there, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. That is great. Thank you so much, all three of you, for sharing here. Let's give them a hand. Woo-hoo-hoo. And then Brent's back up. This is your stand if you.
Okay. So Tracy's on the very end?
Actually, Tracy's not going to be here.
Okay, so it's just these.
But you need to add Reg's name.
It was added on one version. I'm not sure why it's not there. So we'll take Tracy off and make sure Reg is on there.
Yes.
So I'll give, during the clapping for you three, I'll come on up. I'll say something along the, I have it all scripted already, but I don't have those notes with me, to say everybody matters, and we've all, if you're here today, you're part of the story. But let's rewind to the beginning, and I'm going to invite, this is just telling you, different time periods in our church history. If you begin attending here, stand up. And then I have a one-sentence thank you or blessing. And then the next segment of our history, stand up while the others are. I have a little blessing, 1 or 2 sentences. And then I think it's in 3 or 4 sections, but it's whatever you said. And finally, everyone standing, okay? And then is you have been a part and are a part of the story God is writing. Thank you, thank you. I don't know if I have a prayer then or not. I don't think so. But it's just a participant, and everyone ends up standing, at which point?
We sing a song.
We sing a song, okay, because now they're standing. So
And then after that, you're
Sermon.
speaking. Yeah.
Sermon.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we close with a song.
Yeah.
Kim, are we good with everybody sitting in the orders that they were sitting in just now?
Yes.
Okay. So remember where you were sitting and take the same seat tomorrow?
And we'll have the mic situation figured out specifically tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Like where are they getting them from and...
Let me get some instructions on that. So what we'll do with the handheld microphones is we'll put some tape on them with your name on them. And so there's a couple mics that 3 different people are using tomorrow. So they'll have 3 names on it. So for the 3 of you, or the 4 of you over there.
Interview 1.
It would be actually probably Joyce, Julie, and Jim. If you could make sure that these people get your microphones, and it's just the other name that's on your microphone. So Jim, you'll have
Can they...
Reg, like Reg's. Jim, give yours to Reg. Julie, give yours to Brenda. Joyce, give yours to Jason, and it'll be marked on the microphone. Bring them down. Well, I think probably when you come off stage, come down and hand them to you. And that way, when you go up on stage, you don't have to fumble around and get them, you just have them with you. And we'll need to make sure that we get the mics to you.
Right, that's the other handoff I'm a little concerned about.
And maybe it's just on the chairs. We'll check in with us tomorrow for those, we'll figure out those details.
We need some sort of
I don't know how the chairs are getting here.
third chair or fifth chair, fourth chair, because there will be one left.
Just sit how you did this morning.
Right, we'll have an extra chair.
So we probably need to see if we maybe take that off or something.
Yeah, I have no idea how the chairs are getting here or going away.
Okay, we gotta figure that out.
Do you want, as was asked, do you want us to carry our chairs off?
No, I do know that. We'll have either, if they're going off, we'll have somebody else do that. Or the next day. On the microphones, if they will be in the on position, the tendency is always to look to see if they're on and to mess with the switch. Just ignore all of that. Just don't worry about it. If you don't come on, or it doesn't sound like you're coming on, keep talking. It's back there, and they'll take care of that. So they'll be locked in the on position. So even if you click the switch, it won't do anything. So don't look at the microphone, because that makes everybody in the room look at the microphone, which draws attention to the fact that it doesn't work. So the best thing to do is just keep going like it's working.
They'll be on, we're holding them over here at our seat.
They won't be unmuted. They'll be muted and on, I guess is that.
Hold it close to the stomach.
Yes.
Hungry sound out of the 50s.
So that means for the first service, particularly, we all need to sit close to the front, somewhere around here.
Yeah, I would say if our little group of people, if we could be here first couple rows, because I think choir people are going to come off and sit here.
So these 4 will be over here also.
Yeah.
So sit right around in the front center. After your interview, you can walk out.
You can walk right out. No problem with that if you want to do that.
You'll probably want to attend one service to hear the whole thing, but you don't need to. Once you're done with your interview, you can walk back and come in the back and sit in the back or wherever you want. But at the beginning of all 3 services, let's plan on being up front. Good enough?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Can we give the front 2 rows to this group?
Let's see.
Let's do that.
Well,
Choir can go behind them. So let's plan on taking the front 2 rows here. So probably, actually, if you all want to take the second row, you can go the first row, because it doesn't matter.
We've got enough chairs for all of them right now.
but that way your family. I think tomorrow morning it'd be wise for all of you to be here at 8:15.
How are you with that one, Joyce?
It'll help us to have a visual.
You're getting a cold
have questions about your part here? Okay.
This was really very helpful, because it changes totally what I'm going to say, knowing what particularly Red is going to say. I'm totally confused.
Okay. Okay, good. Are you okay with that shift? Oh, absolutely. All right.
But because it really emphasizes the formative times in the 80s and 90s schools, where we
Well, thank you very, very much for giving time this morning, and to whatever degree tomorrow feels like a risk for you, I just really appreciate you being willing to do that. And whatever part of this feels like maybe it's a little chaotic, it'll feel less like that tomorrow. I am 100% sure.